Have you ever felt the ground shake because of a crime so brazen it leaves you speechless? I'm not talking about a bank heist or car theft. I'm talking about my artisanal coffee, the kind I grow with my own hands, roast with my soul, and protect like it's gold. Well, Emily Parker, the tyrannical queen of Pinewood Heights HOA, stormed onto my terrace, stuffed a bag full of my prize-winning beans, and strutted off like I was her servant. But she didn't know she was poking a hornet's nest. I turned her breakfast into a spice-filled horror show, and what came next? A war the whole neighborhood stopped to watch. Want to know how I made this supreme Karen beg for water? Stick with me, because this story will hook you till the end. I moved to Pinewood Heights with that naive idea you get from watching American suburb movies, thinking I'd find peace. You know the type? A fancy neighborhood with gates that practically scream, "You've made it." Trees so perfectly trimmed, they look straight out of a gardening catalog, and that freshly. Cut grass smell that makes you feel like life's finally about to turn into a butter commercial. I was already picturing my mornings with a cup of coffee on the porch, the sun rising, birds chirping. Perfection, right? Except paradise had a crack right down the middle, and that crack wasn't subtle. It had a name, a fixed address, and an almost supernatural knack for turning tranquility into a nightmare. Emily Parker. No, she wasn't just one of those insufferable types who show up at HOA meetings with a clipboard and a fake smile. She was a floral apron-wearing Godzilla, the supreme chaos commander, the queen of rules nobody asked for. If you think I'm exaggerating, hear me out. Who else would have the gall to invent rules like no watering plants after 6 p.m. because it ruins the nighttime aesthetic? Or fine poor Mr. Jenkins because his fence was beige, yes, beige, and not the sacred soft cream she'd decreed as divine law. Emily didn't send warnings, she sent bills. And me, poor fool, I thought I'd escape unscathed, but it didn't take long to realize my artisanal coffee, the stuff I hand-ground every morning, with beans I brought back from a trip to the countryside, had become her target. Yep, because apparently in that woman's mind the smell of my coffee was too intrusive for Pinewood Heights' delicate noses. And the worst part? She didn't just complain, she took it. She'd waltz onto my porch like she owned the place, help herself to a cup and have the nerve to say, "It could be bolder." It was war. I'm crazy about coffee, but don't come at me with that soulless powder you find at the store, that grey stuff that looks like it was ground in the Middle Ages and left in a damp warehouse to rot in peace. No, I'm talking real coffee, the kind with a story that carries life in every sip. Coffee I plant on my terrace, harvest with my own hands, dry in the sun until the beans gleam like dark little treasure stones, and roast with a precision bordering on obsession. All to achieve an aroma that doesn't just wake your senses, but makes you forget the world outside is a mess. This isn't just a drink to me. It's a hobby, a therapy, a sacred morning ritual I defend tooth and nail. It all started years ago, on some random day when I stared at a cup of generic coffee and thought, I can't take it anymore. Perfect. Coffee doesn't come from a dusty shelf. It comes from effort, sweat, stubbornness. That's when I decided to turn my terrace into a little urban farm. I bought seedlings, fragile little things that looked more like dried twigs than a promise of something big, and adjusted the soil like a mad scientist, testing acidity, drainage, shade, everything. I tended those plants like they were my kids, watered them at the right time, pruned them with care, kept an eye out for any yellowing leaves. And the result? My God, the result! Beans so good, so full of personality that the roasting smell rose like magical smoke, wafted across the yard and spilled into the street. The mailman, old Mr. Roberto, would stop on the sidewalk every day without fail, sniffing the air like a bloodhound, and yell over the fence, "Kid, where's that smell coming from? You selling this stuff?" I'd laugh, proud, because that aroma was my victory, and little did I know the start of my war with Emily Parker. But then came the problem, and it wasn't some discreet little issue you could ignore and move on from. A few weeks ago, I started noticing something weird, one of those details that nags at you like a pebble in your shoe. My bags of beans, which I left drying on the terrace with the care of a jeweler aligning diamonds, were different, lighter, you know. At first I thought it was in my head. I must have counted wrong, I told myself. trying to convince myself. After all, who the hell would steal coffee in a fancy neighborhood like Pinewood Heights, with cameras on every corner, doormen who look like action movie bodyguards, and a security system that feels straight out of NASA? But the disappearing didn't stop. A handful vanished here, another evaporated there. It was subtle, almost artistic, like the thief wanted to taunt me without leaving an obvious trail. Except I know my beans. I weigh them, I smell them, I feel those bags like a father knows his child's cry. Something was off, and I wasn't letting it slide. So on a chilly morning, I decided to play detective. I was in the kitchen, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, holding my coffee cup like it was an anchor keeping me calm. The roasting smell still lingered in the air, mingling with that heavy silence that comes before a breakthrough. That's when I saw it. A shadow. Not a bird landing on the railing or the wind rustling the plants. A human shadow, messing around, on my terrace like it was their own backyard. My heart jumped, like that jolt you get when you almost hit a cat on the road. I dropped the cup in the sink, almost spilled it but swallowed the yell, and stood there glued to the window, spying like a B-movie detective. The shadow moved fast, sneaky, but with a boldness that left me torn between rage and awe. Who had the guts to invade my sanctuary, my coffee temple right under my nose? I had to know. And deep down I already had a hunch with a first name, a last name, and a history of fines for badly painted fences. And there she was, in all her absurd glory. Emily Parker, live and in color, like a slapstick comedy villain nobody asked for. She was wearing a faded gray hoodie, the kind you find crumpled at the bottom of a closet with frayed sleeves, and an air of better days gone by, probably the days before she had to climb fences to steal someone else's coffee. In her hand, she carried a ridiculous cloth bag stamped with tacky flowers that screamed, "I'm eco-friendly and superior," the type you get for free at a neighborhood fair and use only to haul junk. But it wasn't junk she was after. No. Sir? With a boldness bordering on surreal, she scaled my low fence, a structure that, let's be honest, wasn't built to stop anyone, but still required some effort. And she did it with a clumsy agility, like a retired ninja who still remembers the moves from decades-old training, but trips over her pride along the way, crouched near my bags of beans, the ones I'd harvested with calloused hands, dried. In the sun with near-religious care, and stored like they were bars of gold in a personal vault, she started looting. It wasn't a rushed theft, the kind a thief does with their heart in their throat, glancing around. Not at all. Emily Parker scooped handfuls of my beans into her bag, with an infuriating calm, like she was at an organic market picking ripe tomatoes, or better yet, like my terrace had turned into a gourmet coffee buffet, and she was the event's queen, taking as much as she pleased without even checking the price. I watched it all from the window, the steam from my forgotten morning coffee rising from the cup in the sink, and for a few seconds, I swear, I was paralyzed. It was a mix of shock, disbelief, and a twinge of admiration for that woman's sheer audacity. Who in their right mind thinks they can invade someone's terrace, steal months of hard work, and walk off like nothing happened? Emily Parker, of course. The same one who fined the whole neighborhood for infractions like misaligned trash cans or grass 2 centimeters too tall. She was a hurricane of petty rules, and now, apparently, a professional coffee thief. I could have screamed until the windows rattled, called the cops with a dramatic police report, or dropped the bomb in the HOA WhatsApp group. Picture the headline, "Emily Parker, Coffee Thief, Strikes Again." It would have been an epic scandal, with neighbors split between those making memes and those sending outraged messages in all caps. But that would have been too easy, too quick, too civilized. No, Emily Parker didn't deserve a textbook solution. She wanted to play thief, raid my terrace like it was a corner store. Then I'd make her pay, with interest, with style, and with a lesson she'd never forget. My brain was already spinning, a cauldron of vengeful ideas bubbling as I stared at the empty spot where my beans used to be. I needed something beyond petty revenge, something that hit hard but kept my dignity intact. That's when I decided it was time to fight back, on the same turf where she challenged me. I stormed down to the pantry like a general planning an ambush, my eyes scanning the shelves for ammunition. I opened boxes, rummaged through jars, digging through forgotten spices and canned goods like my life depended on it. I wanted something simple, but with a gut-punch impact. Something that would turn her crime into a punishment as cunning as... It was poetic. And then, hidden behind a half-open bag of rice, I found the treasure. A little jar of chipotle chili powder, the kind that doesn't mess around. It was a dark red, almost sinister powder, with a smoky scent that made your eyes water just from opening the lid. Strong enough to turn anything into an active volcano, a fiery eruption that'd leave even the toughest cowboy coughing and begging for water. Perfect. My heart leapt with satisfaction. I had the ideal weapon to teach that hoodie-wearing thief a Tura lesson. I returned to the terrace with a grin that was half vengeance, half madness. I grabbed a batch of my beans. Not the best ones, of course. I wasn't about to sacrifice my gems for this cause, but a decent enough amount to look tempting. I dumped them into a bowl, and then came the stroke of genius. I mixed in a generous dose of that killer chili powder, stirring carefully so the spice seeped into every nook, coating the beans like an invisible layer of fiery justice. The smell was already a strange blend, the rich aroma of coffee undercut by a treacherous hint of smoke and heat that promised tears. I spread it all out on a clean cloth and left it drying on the terrace, strategically placed right where she'd struck before. It was the perfect trap, a poisoned gift wrapped in shiny dark beans. I could almost picture it. Emily coming back with her ridiculous bag, thinking she'd won again, only to take home a surprise that would make her rethink every life choice. I sat in the kitchen, cup in hand, and waited. The game had flipped, and I could hardly wait to see her face when the volcano erupted. The next morning, I was up before the sun even considered showing its face, the sky still tinged with that grayish blue that makes the world feel suspended between night and day. It wasn't laziness that dragged me out of bed. It was anticipation, pure and crystalline, mixed with an almost childlike glee knowing the show was about to start. I positioned myself at the kitchen window, like a sniper at his post. Curtains, cranked just enough to give me a full view of the terrace without being spotted. The coffee cup in my hand, a legit batch, no chili, because I deserved that reward, warmed my fingers as I waited, eyes locked on the low fence that had become my enemy's official entryway. I knew she'd come. Emily Parker wasn't the type to abandon a habit, especially one that involved stomping on my pride like it was a doormat. It didn't take long. There she came, emerging from the shadows of Pinewood Heights' impeccably trimmed trees, like a queen on her morning patrol. Her hair was flawless, tied back in a ponytail so perfect it seemed to defy gravity, and she wore black yoga pants that screamed, "I'm healthy, superior, and untouchable." She walked with that firm, almost theatrical stride, as if the entire neighborhood was her private kingdom, and we mere peasants were there to applaud her procession. She hopped the fence with the same clumsy agility as before, a wobbly but determined leap. Like scaling my property was just another item on her to-do list. She went straight for the special beans, the ones I'd prepared with such fiery affection, and scooped up a generous handful with her perfectly manicured fingers. Then, in a move that almost made me laugh out loud, she brought the beans to her nose and sniffed, tilting her head like a coffee sommelier, an expert evaluating the harvest. Little did she know she wasn't just inhaling the scent of my crop, but the smell of defeat disguised as victory. That smug little smirk returned to her face as she stuffed the beans into her cloth bag. Yes, the same ridiculous floral one, and turned back, skipping off toward home with the confidence of someone who thinks they've hit the jackpot. I didn't budge. I sat on the terrace, the cool morning air brushing my face, and settled into my chair like someone gearing up for the final act of a tragic opera. The still warm coffee cup in my hand, the pure scent of my legit beans reminding me why I'd started this war. I began counting the minutes in my head, my heart beating to a rhythm of anticipation that was almost musical. It didn't even take an hour. I knew it wouldn't. Emily wasn't the type to save a trophy for later. She'd want to flaunt those beans, grind them, brew a cup to brag about at the next HOA meeting, maybe even post it on Instagram with a caption like, "Nothing like a fresh blend to start the day." I could picture it, her in the kitchen, grinder. Humming, hot water hitting the filter, steam rising. And then, chaos. The chipotle chili would awaken like a sleeping dragon, turning that pretentious sip into a blaze she'd never forget. I stayed there, quiet, the sun starting to gild the backyard leaves, and smiled. The silence of Pinewood Heights had never felt so full of promise. Suddenly, the pristine silence of Pinewood Heights shattered with a scream that seemed to come from another realm. It wasn't just any scream, the kind you let out when you drop a glass or step on a Lego in the dark. No, this was primal, guttural, a sound blending pure despair with the fury of someone who'd just woken a dragon in their own throat. It was as if hell itself had opened a branch in her house, and Emily Parker was the panicked manager. Seconds later, her front door flew open with a bang, nearly off its hinges, and out she stumbled, tripping down the porch steps like a puppet with its strings cut. Her face was red as a ripe tomato, but not in that charming too much sun way. It was an alarming red, like a traffic signal screaming, "Stop everything." Her eyes, wide and teary, looked like marbles about to pop out of her face, and she was coughing like mad, a mix of choking, wheezing, and little yelps. That echoed across the neighborhood. Without thinking, she staggered into the yard, legs wobbly as if the ground were made of jelly. She grabbed the hose like it was a lifeboat in a shipwreck, yanked the nozzle off with trembling fingers, and turned the water on full blast. The jet erupted with force, and she aimed it straight at her mouth, gulping desperately as if she could douse an internal fire, which, well, she basically was, but it didn't stop there. The hose became an unruly weapon in her hands. She sprayed water in her face, over her once perfect hair that now looked like a soggy bird's nest, even down her neck, as if the chili had spread to every pore. It was a scene straight out of a movie, a botched exorcism mixed with cheap comedy, like one of those sequences where the villain gets their comeuppance and you're not sure whether to laugh or feel sorry. Her black yoga pants, once a symbol of her superiority, were soaked and clinging to her legs, and the grey hoodie, which she must have swapped into after the theft, dripped like she'd faced a monsoon. Me? I was on the terrace, coffee cup still in hand, watching the spectacle like someone witnessing the grand finale of a perfect plan. When her scream hit, I nearly choked. The coffee went up my nose, burned a bit, but it was worth every second. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing loud enough for her to hear, but my body was shaking with silent glee. It was poetry in chaos form, and I wasn't the only one enjoying the show. The neighborhood curtains started twitching, curious heads popping up at windows like popcorn. Old Tom from House 12, the guy always armed with a camera to capture anything gossip-worthy for Sunday, barbecues, stepped onto his porch with his phone out, snapping pics like a paparazzo on a lucky day. Mrs. Linda from the corner opened her window and stood there, arms crossed, shaking her head like she was saying, "I knew that woman was trouble." Even the mailman, Mr. Roberto, stopped his bike mid-street, jaw dropped, watching Emily wrestle the hose like it was a garden monster. I stayed there, leaning back in my chair, the morning sun warming my face, the scent of my real coffee rising from the cup. The sound of water hitting the ground, mixed with her choking gasps, was almost a symphony. Emily Parker, the queen of Rules the Bean Thief, was now just a drenched and humiliated figure, paying the price for her own greed. And me? I'd never felt such peace in a sip of coffee. I raised my cup to the air, the steam still curling up in lazy spirals, and made a silent toast, not to anyone but to that perfect moment, to the justice I'd served up in beans and chili. The morning sun bathed the terrace, gilding the leaves of my plants, and I took a long sip of my coffee. The good stuff, the real deal, the kind I ground with love and not a trace of killer chipotle. The rich, warm flavor slid down my throat. So a well-earned reward as I watched the aftermath of the chaos across the street. Emily was still out there in her yard, a tragic, sopping mess, snorting like a bull that just took a horn to the gut. Her once flawless hair was now a sticky clump plastered to her forehead, dripping water onto the lawn. She'd surely fine someone for not being up to standard. The hose lay abandoned on the ground, spitting out a feeble trickle of water, as if even it had given up on that lost battle, Then she turned and locked eyes with me. Even from a distance, I could feel the heat of that glare. It wasn't just anger, it was volcanic hatred. A "You'll pay for this" scrawled in bold letters across her red, teary eyes. Her mouth twisted into a half snarl, like she was holding back a scream to avoid giving the neighbors, still peeking from their windows like curious owls, more of a show. I could almost hear her thoughts spinning. How dare he? Me, Emily Parker, Queen of Pinewood Heights, humiliated by some coffee-obsessed nobody? But deep down I knew this wasn't over. People like her don't swallow defeat, not willingly at least. She wouldn't run to the WhatsApp group to whine or call the cops with a fake complaint. No, Emily was plotting revenge. I saw it in her eyes, in the way she squared her shoulders despite the soaked hoodie, in how she tossed her wet hair back like she was saying, "This isn't done." She was a wounded beast, licking her paws, but already sharpening her claws for counterattack, and me, I didn't flinch. I propped my elbows on the terrace railing, the still warm cup in my hands, and flashed a little smirk. Subtle, but enough for her to catch. Whatever came next, I was ready for the next round. Because no one, not the Supreme Chaos Commander, not even the devil in yoga pants, messes with my coffee and walks away unscathed. I had my seedlings, my grinder, my chili stashed in the pantry, and a steel patience to deal with her. If Emily thought that hose scream was the end of the story, she was dead wrong. The coffee war had just heated up, and I was already grinding beans for the next chapter. 2 days later, the neighborhood was still buzzing with the echo of Emily's scream, a sound that had already become local legend, the kind of tale neighbors would retell at barbecues for years. I was at the gate, fiddling with the lock she'd probably ignore in her next raid when Greg showed up. Greg of the burnt barbecue, that big guy who nearly set his porch on fire last holiday and became the butt of jokes for weeks. He strolled over with that sloppy gait, wrinkled t-shirt, and a grin that said he already knew the day's topic wasn't the weather. "Did you see Emily yesterday?" he asked, his voice thick with barely contained laughter, like he couldn't wait to spill the gossip. After the hose show, she spent the whole day locked inside, didn't open the curtains, didn't reply in the WhatsApp group, nothing. "I think she's plotting something, man," he chuckled, shaking his head like he was watching a suspense. Flicken knew the villain was coming back meaner. I smiled, not just any smile, but that sideways one, blending confidence with a dash of, "I saw this coming." "Let her come," I replied, cool as ever, brushing the dust off my hands, onto my pants like I was clearing the stage for the next fight. Greg stared at me for a second, eyes narrowed, then let out an that was equal parts fear and pure admiration. "Man, you're nuts," he said, his tone rising a bit, like I was some crazy genius he wasn't sure whether to follow or flee. "But seriously, if you need backup, call me. Like, I don't know how to make coffee like you, but I can hold a hose or chuck some chili at someone." He laughed again, clapping my shoulder, but you could tell he was half serious. The kind of support that comes with one foot out the door, but it's support nonetheless. I mentally noted the reinforcement. Greg might be a disaster with charcoal and a lighter, but he was loyal, had a humor that could diffuse any tension, and most importantly, seemed as fed up with Emily's dumb rules as I was. "All right, partner," I said, pointing a finger at him like we were sealing a pact. "If this war heats up, you're my man in the trenches." He nodded, still laughing, but with a glint in his eye that said he was in. Maybe for fun, maybe out of curiosity, but definitely in. As he walked, off whistling some random tune, I turned back to the terrace and glanced at her house, curtains still shut tight like a castle on lockdown. Emily might be licking her wounds now, but I knew her silence was just the calm before the storm, and I'd need allies. Greg, maybe old Tom with his camera, perhaps even Mrs. Linda with her "I told you so" look. Because in this coffee war, it wasn't just about beans or chili. It was about showing that in Pinewood Heights, no one messed with me and got off scot-free. For a few days, the neighborhood sank into an almost supernatural silence. No Emily Parker prancing around with her ridiculous floral bag, no sneaky thefts on my terrace, no drama echoing through Pinewood Heights' pristine streets. It was like the hose scream had sealed a temporary truce, an unasked-for ceasefire. Everyone noticed. The neighbors stopped peering out their windows so much the WhatsApp group went quiet. Even old Tom put his camera away, maybe thinking the soap opera was over. But I wasn't fooled. I knew Emily well enough to realize that silence wasn't peace. It was the calm before the storm, the kind of stillness that comes before a thunderclap shakes the ground. She wasn't the type to give up. She was hiding, scheming, sharpening her claws to come back swinging. I kept my guard up, checking the terrace every morning, my eyes always darting to her house, waiting for the next move. And it came on a rainy morning. One of those days when the sky looks like a grey blanket thrown over the world, thick drops pounding the roof like a warning. Ascending the terrace with my jacket slung over my shoulders, the damp air clinging to my skin, I stepped outside to grab my bags of beans and bring them indoors before the water ruined everything. But the moment I set foot out there, I sensed something off, a strange, heavy smell cutting through the fresh scent of rain. It was wet, rotten, like fruit forgotten in a corner or wood decaying after a flood. Wrinkling my nose, I approached the bags, and what I saw turned my stomach. They were soaked, not just damp from the rain, but drenched to the core, the fabric darkened and dripping, as if someone had dunked them in a lake. I ran my hand over one, and water oozed between my fingers, cold and foul, carrying bits of beans already starting to rot. I lifted one with both hands, and its weight was pitiful. My stash, weeks of harvesting, drying, and roasting with near-obsessive care, reduced to a soggy, useless mess. I didn't need to think hard to know who'd done it. This wasn't an accident, not rain leaking through a poorly fitted roof. Someone had dumped buckets of water, buckets, plural, because the damage was methodical, calculated, cruel, right into the heart of my sanctuary. And only one person in this neighborhood had the motive, the audacity, and the grudge to pull it off: Emily Parker. The coffee thief had leveled up. She wasn't content with stealing anymore. Now she sabotaged, destroyed, wiped out months of my effort with the precision of someone who knows exactly where it hurts most. My blood boiled, my hands shaking as I dropped the sodden bag to the ground, water splashing onto my shoes. I looked toward her house, curtains still drawn, but I could almost picture the smug victory grin she must have been hiding inside, thinking she'd turned the tables, but she forgot one crucial detail. I'm not the type to stay quiet. I don't cry over spilled milk, or in this case soaked coffee, and let it go. Emily might have landed a low blow, but that only fueled me more. She wanted war, then she'd get war. A dirty, clever war, the kind that makes your enemy regret ever starting it. I clenched my fists, the rotten stench still clinging to my nostrils, and stormed back inside, my mind racing. My stash might be ruined, but my will to fight, that she'd never drown. Now it was personal, more than a neighborly spat, more than a feud over stolen beans or petty fines. Emily had crossed a line I didn't even know existed, turning my passion into a pile of drenched garbage, and that ignited something in me that wouldn't fade any time soon. I could taste revenge on my tongue, bitter like burnt coffee, but with a sweet undertone of promise. As I cleaned the terrace and tossed out the ruined bags, my mind churned at a mile a minute, mapping every scrap I knew about her, hunting for that insufferable woman's Achilles heel. Then, like a bolt of lightning on a clear day, I remembered a detail Greg had let slip at a barbecue months back, between a beer and an undercooked rib. Emily was obsessed with those fancy coffee capsules, the kind that come with overpriced machines that look like status trophies, with names like Lungo, Supremo or Ristretto Intenso, the sort of thing she flaunted at HOA meetings like a badge of honor. "She's got a huge stash," Greg had said, laughing. "Keeps it all in a shed out back like a gourmet capsule bunker." And the best part? He'd mentioned, almost offhand, that the shed had no lock. Nothing, not even a cheap padlock or a rusty chain. Emily, in all her Pinewood Heights queenly arrogance, figured no one would dare mess with her. That fear of her wrath or her absurd fines was security enough. Perfect. A flaw so glaring, so inviting, it was like a gift wrapped with a bow. I wasn't going to steal anything. That'd be stooping to her level, and I've got more class than that. I wouldn't break anything either. No need for vandalism to make my point. My plan was subtler, crueler, more cinematic. I'd make sure her next coffee, That sacred moment she probably savored every morning with an air of superiority turned into a horror movie-worthy experience. Something to make her choke, sweat, and question every choice that led her there. It'd be the perfect payback. She destroyed my coffee, so I'd turn hers into a drinkable nightmare. I shut the pantry door with a decisive click, already picturing her stash. Rows of colorful little boxes lined up like a caffeine rainbow, waiting for my intervention. I didn't need heavy artillery for this. No chipotle chili this time, since repeating the trick would be too predictable. No, I'd get creative. Maybe a hint of something sour, like distilled vinegar injected into the capsules with a fine syringe, or perhaps a harmless but nasty powder like fish meal, to give every sip a stench she'd never forget. I sat in the kitchen, scribbling ideas on a napkin, the damp terrace smell still in my nose as a reminder of what she'd done. Emily thought she'd drowned me with those buckets of water, but she didn't know I'm a good swimmer, and even better at turning the tables. Her next coffee wouldn't just be a drink, it'd be a masterpiece of chaos, and I couldn't wait to watch from the front row. I waited for night to fall with the patience of someone who knows the best revenge is served cold, or in this case hot as hell. I spent the whole day faking normalcy, watering the surviving plants on the terrace, chatting briefly with Greg at the gate, but inside I was a volcano ready to erupt. When the sun finally sank below the horizon, painting Pinewood Heights a deep purple, I kept an eye on her house from the window. The lights went out one by one, like stars giving up on the sky. First the living room, then the kitchen, until the upstairs went dark. That was the signal. She'd gone to bed, probably dreaming of new petty rules or her next smug HOA speech. I grabbed my backpack, tossed in a flashlight, the bottle of habanero extract I'd saved for emergencies like this, and a Swiss Army knife to pry open the capsules. It was time to flip the script. I slipped out the back door, the cold night air, biting my face, and approached her fence with what I imagined was cat-like agility, though let's be honest, it nearly turned into a slapstick comedy. My foot caught on a ceramic pot she'd strategically left in the path, and I stumbled, arms flailing like windmills to keep from face-planting. I bit back a curse, straightened up, and hopped the fence with an awkward but functional leap. I landed on the other side with a soft thud, heart pounding like a drum, half from adrenaline, half from the fear of some nosy neighbor flipping on their lights and catching me red-handed. But silence reigned, broken only by the distant chirp of a stubborn cricket. I darted, crouched, to the shed out back, a small wooden structure that looked more like a fancy garden shed than a coffee bunker. I pushed the door open, and it creaked like something out of a horror flick. There it was, a thief's paradise, a caffeine addict's dream with a dash of bad intent. The stacks of capsules gleamed under my flashlight's beam, lined up in perfect rows like trophies in a display case. Shiny aluminum boxes with pretentious names like Espresso Royale and Caramello Divino. It was almost beautiful if it weren't so infuriating to think of how much she bragged about them. I knelt on the cold floor, opened my backpack and grabbed about 10 capsules from the most accessible stack, not touching everything, just enough to make an impact. With my Swiss Army knife, I sliced each one open carefully, cutting the aluminum, seal like a back-alley surgeon, the original coffee scent wafting up in small waves. I dumped the powder into a baggie to leave no trace, then brought out the star of the show, the habanero extract. That stuff was liquid devilry, blood red, the kind that makes you sweat just looking at the bottle, with a smell that already tickled your nose. I dripped a few drops into each capsule, not too much, just enough to turn her next sip into a one-way trip to hell. I sealed them back up with precision to avoid suspicion and repositioned them exactly as they were, like a master criminal cleaning the scene. I slipped out of the shed like a ghost, the door creaking again as it closed, and retraced my steps, hopping the fence with a bit more grace this time, or at least without nearly breaking my face. When I got home, I locked the door, tossed the backpack in a corner and flopped onto the couch, heart still racing but a wide grin spreading across my face. The stage was set, the curtain ready to rise. Emily would wake up tomorrow, fire up to that overpriced machine of hers, and drink a coffee that wasn't just a beverage. It was a ticking time bomb of liquid fire, a revenge as scorching as the pride she'd trampled. I could almost hear her screams already. Bring on the next round. I woke up early, before the first ray of sun hit the roof, my body buzzing with anticipation. It wasn't the alarm that got me out of bed. It was the sheer desire to witness my plans pay off. I grabbed a cup of my legit coffee, the kind free of chili or spite, and headed to the terrace with the calm of someone who knows the best is yet to come. I settled into my chair, the cool morning breeze brushing my face, and kept an eye on her house, curtains still drawn like a theatre. Before showtime, I knew she was methodical. Every morning, like clockwork, she'd turn on that fancy machine to brew the perfect coffee she loved to boast about. Today, though, the ritual was going to be a little more explosive. I took a slow sip, savoring the quiet, and waited, ears perked like a hunter in the woods. It didn't take long. The neighborhood's silence was torn apart by a howl that seemed otherworldly, not human, not animal, but something between a wounded wolf and an exorcised demon. The sound cut through walls, bounced off the trimmed trees, and even silenced. The birds startled into stillness. I set my cup on the table with a grin I couldn't hold back, and dashed to the window for the best view of the spectacle. And there she was, Emily Parker, the dethroned queen of Pinewood Heights, bolting out of her house like the devil himself was on her heels. Her face was red as a hot coal, not the healthy glow of a little sun, but a feverish, almost neon red, like she'd dunked her head in a pot of spicy sauce. She was sweating like she'd run a marathon in the Sahara, beads dripping down her forehead, her perfect hair now plastered to her neck like a wet towel. She stumbled across the lawn, the same lawn she fined others for not mowing right, and fell to her knees, hands clutching her throat as if she could claw out the fire the habanero had ignited inside. She tried to spit, cough, scream, all at once, but it was useless. The habanero extract had taken over, storming her mouth like an invading army, each sip of that tampered coffee burning deeper than the last. Her wide, teary eyes seemed to beg for mercy, but I knew habanero doesn't negotiate. It attacks and conquers. Then came the glorious moment, the grand finale I couldn't have scripted even in my wildest dreams. Emily, in full panic, spotted the decorative fountain in her yard, one of those tacky things with a stone cherub spitting water, probably picked to flaunt at the HOA. Without a second thought, she staggered toward it, legs wobbly like jelly, and threw herself in, clothes and all. It wasn't a graceful dive or a calculated jump. It was a desperate splash, water exploding everywhere. She stayed there, half submerged, half flailing, yoga pants soaked and clinging to her legs, grey hoodie floating around like an old rag, trying to douse the internal inferno with the fountain's icy water. The stone cherub seemed to pity her, spitting a feeble stream while she gurgled and choked. Me? I nearly fell out of my chair laughing, the coffee in my hand trembling as I fought not to spill it. It was an Oscar-worthy scene, comedy, drama, and a touch of horror, all rolled into one. The neighbors started popping up at their windows again, old Tom already with his phone out, Mrs. Linda shaking her head like she was watching a circus catch fire. Emily might have wrecked my stash, but I'd turned her coffee into a liquid nightmare. And now there she was, drowning in her own arrogance. The first to emerge were the professional busybodies, those neighbors with a nose for trouble. Curtains parted like it was a theatre premiere. Doors creaked, slippers shuffled on concrete, and soon the condo hallway turned into an impromptu audience. Tom, who wouldn't miss a scandal even if it were hailing, raised his phone like it was. Fair trophy. Click. Another photo. He'd probably already framed it cinematically. His feed in the neighborhood group was going to blow up before the afternoon was out. Mrs. Linda from House 8, usually stone-faced, laughed out loud. She laughed so hard she choked on it and had to brace herself against the doorframe to keep from falling. The little Yorkshire in her arms yapped nervously, unsure whether to flee or join in. By now the spectacle had earned Event of the Month status. Down the street, Greg, the neighbor always ready for a barbecue, raised his arm and gave me a thumbs up with a wide grin. It was the kind of gesture that said, "Congrats. You exceeded all my expectations today." And me. I stood there, steady, almost solemn, like nothing had happened. I held my coffee with both hands, as if it were a sacred artifact. Inside, though, I was waging a war against laughter. Chest. Puffed out, throat burning, face starting to flush from holding back the urge to cackle. And then she emerged. Slowly, almost in slow motion, Emily rose from the central garden fountain. Water streamed down every inch of her. Her hair plastered to her forehead and cheeks, arms outstretched, as if trying to balance whatever dignity. She had left. The floral dress, once light and elegant, now hung heavy like a soaked cloak of humiliation. She stopped, panting, snorting, her eyes blazing with a hatred so intense that if this were a movie, there'd be a suspenseful soundtrack, swelling in the background. And then came that classic moment. Our eyes locked. It was brief but electric, a look that screamed, "I know it was you, you wretch." But she had no proof, no video, no direct witness, just instinct. And for Emily, that was worse than the fall itself. She couldn't do anything, not right then. She was out of moves, disarmed. The audience now waited for her reaction. But she just took a deep breath, turned on her heel and walked away, leaving a trail of water and fury. And I stayed there, still, sipping my coffee with the calm of someone who knows they've just written the day's best chapter. A week passed. The fountain incident was still the neighborhood's favorite gossip. It had practically become local law. And on that sunny Saturday, I was on the terrace with Greg as usual, drinking coffee and laughing again about Emily's epic slide straight into the fountain's center, an unwilling comedy star. We were mid-story, reliving the details, when Greg froze mid-sentence and pointed to the street with his cup tilted in his hand. "Is that a moving truck?" I looked up, curious, and there it was. White, massive, parked right in front of house number 12. The company name splashed across the side, men in reflective vests hopping out of the cab and opening the back doors. One was already pulling out a hand truck. Greg's eyes widened. "Seriously, she's leaving?" I gave a slight nod, a slow smile creeping onto the corner of my mouth. Yes, Emily Parker was moving out. After years reigning as the queen of drama, HOA complaints and garden rules no one followed, she was finally leaving. She'd thrown in the towel, lowered her weapons, surrendered. As boxes were loaded into the truck, some labeled fragile, and social life, non-existent. That last one I made up, obviously. Emily appeared, huge sunglasses, a scowl on her face and stiff steps, like someone walking through hostile territory for the last time. She got into her car like an actress in her final episode, striking a pose of someone who'd lost a war she never should have. Started. No goodbyes to the neighbors, no glance back. Just slammed the door and drove off. Quick, silent, defeated. Raising my coffee cup, I looked at Greg with a victorious grin and declared, as if toasting at a solemn ceremony, "To the end of an era." He clinked his cup back, almost teary-eyed. And in that moment a light breeze blew through, as if the neighborhood itself were letting out a sigh of relief. Some neighbors peeked out their windows, others stepped onto the sidewalk. Mrs. Linda, who still coughed when she laughed too hard, even brought cookies to celebrate. It felt like New Year's. Pinewood Heights was finally at peace, and no one mourned Emily Parker's departure, not for a second. Today my coffee is guarded like a national treasure, locked up tight, safe from prying hands and vengeful glares. I learned that even coffee can be a weapon in a neighborhood war. But most importantly, Pinewood Heights is back to what it always should have been. A little slice of peace with well-kept gardens, dogs barking in the distance, and no drama spilling out of house number 12. Of course, I still sneak a dash of chili into some cups now and then. Just a little, just to keep the fire from ever fully dying out. Because, let's face it, a neighborhood without a hint of chaos loses its charm. So what did you think of this soap opera-worthy saga, spiced with comedy and a touch of subtle revenge? Don't forget, drop a like, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell, because here, my friend, life's full of wild stories, fiery neighbors, and coffees that change fates. See you next time. And remember, watch who you mess with. Sometimes payback comes in the next cup.